So good evening and welcome to the Child Neurology Foundation's 2021 Patient Advocacy Summit. My name is Katie Henches and I'm the Director of Programs for the Child Neurology Foundation. This is our inaugural Transition of Care Patient Advocacy Summit, and we believe that the patient voice and experience is an integral part of a successful transition from pediatric to adult care. This summit focuses on centering those voices and experiences, ensuring that these young adults and those who support them have the knowledge, tools, and confidence to be able to make the process successful. In addition to this summit, CNF offers transition of care toolkits for young adults, caregivers, and clinicians to begin and encourage the many discussions required for a successful transition to adult care. They're also available in Spanish. So if you'd like to see those resources, we'll be dropping the link in the chat. These resources and our summit would be impossible without our partners. We're able to put on summits like this for free today, thanks to generous support from our partners in transitions of care: Acadia, Biogen, Eisai, Genentech, Greenwich, and Zogenix. We also hope that if this session resonates with you and you find it helpful and you are able, that you think about making a donation to the Child Neurology Foundation. It's so helpful in continuing our efforts to provide first-class programming and education like this summit. So if you're interested in contributing, we'll be dropping a link in the chat that you can use to do so. Okay, so on to our panel tonight. It's titled Dating While Rare, Finding Love on the Other Side of Transition. And we're thrilled to have three esteemed panelists join us. Seth Rotberg lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and is the founder of the nonprofit Our Odyssey, a group developed to connect young adults impacted by a rare or chronic condition to improve their quality of life. As part of his patient advocacy, he shares his own story of his mother's 17-year battle with Huntington's disease and discussing how the disease may impact him directly. Eden Summerlin is an artist, activist, and writer who addresses complex social issues using their perspective as an autistic and physically disabled butch lesbian. They're best known as the lead administrator of the Aristocats, which is an autistic self-advocacy platform on multiple social media platforms, primarily Instagram and Twitter. They are diagnosed as autistic between the ages of 8 and 9, and they are currently 19 years old and majoring in anthropology at the University of Vermont. We're also joined today by the Mighty Quinn, who lives in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. She sustained a spinal cord injury at the age of 21 and started her new adventures in life. She's a motivational speaker, teacher, advocate, and outdoor adventurer. Known as the Mighty Quinn, she's the first quadriplegic comic book letterer in the world to work for DC Comics and first to wield a Great Wall of China. On weekends, she turns into a murder ball player, adventure seeker, and disability advocate. By night, she fights the evil villain called inaccessibility by creating comic strips that deal with disability issues. Our moderator for this panel today is DRC Charrington Neal, and works to build inclusive spaces and tell stories for people who identify as disabled and LGBT. DRC is a third-year PhD student in English, rhetoric, and literature at The Ohio State University, where he focuses on the intersection of African-American rhetorical theory, Black digital humanities, and disability studies. He has been honored as an awardee of the Advocate magazine's 40 Under 40 in 2015 for his work in disability storytelling, and is the 2017 Comcast Universal Tony Coelho Media Scholar. So before we get to their comments, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping things. This panel is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to all registrants on the password-protected hub you received access to upon registration. Please remain muted while panelists are speaking, but there will be designated time at the end of the event for you to unmute yourself and ask questions of our panelists. Please indicate that you have a question at that time by using the raise hand button under the reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You're also welcome to ask questions or provide comments at any time by using the chat feature. If you feel comfortable doing so, we encourage you to use your video during this panel for a greater sense of community, but if you have a distracting background or you would prefer not to, feel free to leave it off. So with all of that, I'm happy to turn it over to our moderator tonight, DRC.
Thank you very much. I am so honored and grateful to be here tonight. And I think this is such an important topic, mainly because as a person with cerebral palsy, I was born with cerebral palsy, and as a queer person, I feel like a lot of times dating and sexuality are completely overlooked when it comes to disability. And so I feel like having this discussion tonight is really important. And so with that in mind, we're just gonna get started and jump right on in. And I apologize in advance. I have a little yappy dog that likes to run around, so y'all might hear him in the background. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. The first question that I have is, if you all could tell me a little bit about yourselves, and what your current dating and romantic statuses are. And I will start with Mighty Quinn.
Hi everyone, this is Mighty Quinn. For those of you who don't know what a quadriplegic is, I actually broke my neck when I had the sustained the spinal cord injury. So literally from my chest down, I have no sensation or can't move or no finger functions. And for a relationship status, I am married and I'm a mother of a 3-year-old.
That's wonderful. I was going to say I've actually been watching one of my favorite TV shows right now is The Good Doctor, and they have a whole story arc about pregnancy. And I was like, oh my God, I've never in my entire life ever seen anyone talk about people with disabilities and having kids. So I'm just thrilled. That's wonderful. And we'll definitely get into that a little later. How about Seth?
Hello. Excited to be here. So a little bit about me. My mom had a rare neurological genetic disease called Huntington's disease, as mentioned in the introduction. And she dealt with that for 17 years. It's like having ALS, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's all into one condition. And it slowly deteriorates a person's physical and cognitive abilities. And so at the age of 20, I decided to go through genetic testing and found out I tested positive for it, which means I'm guaranteed to get it unless there's an effective treatment or cure. And so as I race against this invisible clock, I am always trying to share my story to make sure others know that they aren't alone in their fight against their condition, as well as just trying to get my voice heard in medical research. And when I'm not spending time volunteering for our Odyssey, I'm working full-time for a digital health company called WeGo Health, watching or playing sports, spending time with friends or family. And to answer your second question, I am the single one up here, but totally fine with that. Been dating on and off, but with COVID and everything, it's always challenging. And COVID's been my year of self-care, really taking time for myself to figure out those next steps. And as things start to open up, it's trying to figure out, how to, go through dating, how to disclose my health condition, especially since it has an impact on the future. And I feel like we live in a society where we're always thinking about the future, whether it's, your family or career or things like that. So I know we'll get more into it, but that's a little bit about me.
I was going to say, Seth, don't feel bad. Honestly, you are not the only single person on this panel. Having never really, I've dated plenty, but having never actually had a boyfriend, I honestly believe that after COVID, they should just build convents. Like all single people should just go to, it worked in A Sound of Music. It worked wonderfully for her. So I feel like they were onto something, and that should really be something that we should all do. Eden, how about you?
Yeah, so I just have a minor correction about the name of the advocacy page. It's the Autisticats and not the Aristocats. And then
sorry about that.
It's fine. And my relationship status is that I have a girlfriend.
Wonderful. Yeah, I was gonna say it. Seth, you kind of hit on this initially, but I was thinking, having this conversation, the very first thing that we should talk about is how these relationships get started, because I feel like, and Mighty Quinn, honestly, being married, you're probably like whatever, because you're like past this status. But for the rest of us, trying to find somebody to date and trying to introduce them to the concept of disability is incredibly intimidating. So the question that I have for you all is, have you approached talking about your health or disabilities with potential partners? And if you have or have not, how do you choose to do that? So when do you choose to disclose versus not disclosing?
I
And yeah,
oh,
I'll start with you.
I was just gonna say I'll just hop into this because yeah, it's one of the biggest challenges that I face is when is the right time to tell them, right? To disclose your health condition to someone, especially once you tell them, they probably go to Google and they search it and they look at all the symptoms and they're like, oh, wow, this is scary. I actually had one person tell me, wow, that's scary. I was like, you think? Like, of course I know that. And so it is a challenge. And sometimes I will throw it out there. At first, I think it was kind of trial and error to see how they would react. And then I realized, I asked myself, like, can't I can't just throw it out there just because I think that's best, because then they may define me for that rather than seeing me for who I am as a person and seeing me for my qualities beyond the health condition. But it is challenging for me since I also volunteer and work in the health space. So it eventually comes up like, what are you doing this week? Oh, I'm speaking at this event. What's it about? Right. Eventually it comes out. But what I've learned to do is, for me at least, to kind of share how, I'm trying to just help make a difference. My mom had this rare disease, so I may not disclose my own personal gene status yet. But at the end of the day, it's a part of who I am. It doesn't define me, but it does shape me. It helped, make me into, the person I am today. And I also learned sometimes I would tell people about my health condition because I was afraid that they would reject me. So rather than them rejecting me, it's me trying to push them away before they can push me away, because unfortunately I just don't have control over my health condition. I would imagine, I don't want to speak for my fellow panelists, but none of us, I'm sure, woke up one day saying, oh, I wish I had this health condition. And that's the challenge for me, is that I didn't ask for it, but I'm not going to let it define me as who I am as a person. So that's a little bit about me. Long term, want to find, that romantic partner. I want to have a family. I want to create those memories, especially since most of my memories with my mom is when she was sick. And so I think that's a fear of mine, but it's also trying to reflect and understand that it has to be the right person. You have to have a lot of patience and just remind yourself that it shouldn't be just the first person who may care about you just because it feels good. It has to be someone that also shares similar values and interests, and you really build that compatibility with them.
And I actually think that that's a really important point that you brought up at the very end, because I spent years trying to just have conversation. Like, I just wanted, to talk to nice people and go to lunch. And unfortunately, I was sexually abused by a professor who took advantage of that information. And I feel like that's something that people don't even discuss, like that people with disabilities are incredibly vulnerable because we spend our lives in the exact space that you're talking about, being overlooked, being disregarded, and being invisible. And so when someone comes along and they're like, oh, you're so nice, like, let's go, do something, it can turn into something that you totally didn't want. And so I do think that that's a really important distinction. Mighty Quinn. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to add something?
Just real quick, just to add to that is, yeah, when you feel that sense of love, right? And especially if you haven't felt that before, you kind of feel like, wow, this might be it, right? And that you kind of let your guard down. And I think it is a challenge. Even just feeling that small token of love can make the biggest difference. So I totally agree with you on that.
Sure. Mighty Quinn.
Oh yeah, it's me. So I actually experienced all the spectrum of a relationship. I had to be single first in order to find someone, right? But my experience comes from when I had my car accident. I was with a boyfriend then. And my boyfriend, even though he went through the car accident with me, but he never understood my accident, who I became. And I went through an abusive relationship with this boyfriend eventually, that we were together for a good 10 years before I left this abusive relationship. And that's exactly what you guys were talking about earlier, is that when we just grab onto that first person that looks at us and say, oh, you may be interesting, let me give you 3 minutes of my time, and we think that is our whole world, and we'll let them do whatever they want, and in the process we get lost. And that's what I found, that when I got myself out of that relationship, I was devastated, but I got angry. Why should I let other people, someone else, take advantage of me just because I have a disability? I'm a pretty cool chick, and I'm sure I'm a good catch. I just have to find that right person. And then I went on, wrote search for that friend. At first, I wasn't looking for a relationship. I want to find a friend who is worthy of my time and who is worthy of me and whom I like and perhaps have a relationship with. And in that journey, I found so many great friends that I still have today. And, by accident, I found my husband. And it was full disclosure for me. Is that, by the way, I'm this cool girl with awesome wheelchair. My hands may not work, but I have some awesome ways I can teach you how to hold a fork I bet you never thought before. And, that's the kind of attitude I brought out, is that just because we have a disability means it's part of us. And that's what makes us different than everybody else. And that's what makes us cooler. That's what makes us unique. And our disability does not define us, but it makes us that much better and interesting. And, my husband actually saw me on TV. I was talking about how someone with a disability can live the dream and have the world and do some crazy adventures, even in a wheelchair. And he thought, hey, that girl is pretty cool and really happy. I want some of that happiness. That's why he told me. And that's how we got together. We were just talking as friends. And then eventually I was like, I kind of like him. And he's like, I like you too. And then that's how it ended up. It's not something like, hey, I want to be your girlfriend or I want to be your boyfriend. It's more like, let's be friends and see where it go from there. And I think that's how a relationship becomes. And again, our disability is part of us. Our disability is what makes us unique. Embrace it instead of hiding from it.
Yes, thank you. That is like really, really important. And I'm going to come back to something you said a little later. But first, I want to ask Eden.
Yeah. So the way I met my girlfriend was actually partially because I'm autistic, because she knew about the autistic cats before we met. And then we both go to the University of Vermont, and the University of Vermont has an app where you can put a profile on to meet friends who are going to be at school with you. And so we both requested to be each other's friends. And then she saw something at the bottom of my profile saying that I'm an autistic self-advocate. And then she kind of put the puzzle pieces together and was like, hey, are you Eden from the Autistic Cats? And I was like, yeah. And then I said, do you want to meet up and get lunch? And she said, yeah. So we went out to get lunch, and then we were like becoming friends. And then one thing led to another, and now we're together. But so it was very like upfront at the beginning, and something that actually kind of drew her to me. And that's kind of how I approach it in general. Like if I meet someone, I know that I have to tell them within like the first day that I know them that I am autistic, because they need to understand that about me in order to understand the way that I communicate.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like that's super important. It actually leads me to a question that I have for any of you. As a wheelchair user, and honestly, as a gay man, like the problem of visibility is just a problem. Like queer culture is so hyper focused on what people look like that it really doesn't matter. And the bottom line, I tell people repeatedly, you can have a 6-pack ab and a chiseled face, but if you're sitting in a wheelchair, dudes are gonna be like, Yeah, and they don't know how to correlate these two things. I've gotten so many messages from people that are like, "You're actually really attractive," as though that is like a surprise. So the question that I have is, do you think that having a visible disability versus an invisible one? So, like for example, Seth and Eden, you both have invisible disabilities, even though later on it may manifest into something different. Do you think that puts you in a different space as opposed to myself or Mighty Quinn?
So I'll just take this one first because I have other disabilities that are visible. So I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder, and it means, and I also have postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or POTS. So I use mobility aids pretty regularly. I have forearm crutches, and sometimes I'll use wheelchairs if we're going to like a museum or something, and I know I'm gonna need to be walking around for a while. I'll use a wheelchair instead of my crutches. So I have some experience with that. Like the stares and questions. I've had people come up to me and ask, "What's wrong with your legs?" and stuff like that. But I've found that it doesn't really affect my relationship with my girlfriend, probably because she's just very understanding and accepting of all kinds of disabilities, but it does definitely affect people's perception of you. And then combined with the fact that I'm autistic, like not only am I visibly physically disabled, but when people may like try to have a conversation with me, they can tell that something else is going on too.
Well, for myself, I find I get more rejections than people who are able or wanting to approach me right away. Wheelchair, oh my God, she's gonna kill me someday. It's like, that is the perception. My wheelchair apparently is a weapon that deters people from getting close. No. And the first question when I'm interested in a guy is like, can you even have sex? Can you feel like all sorts of that uncomfortable question starts? I'm like, of course I can. You haven't tried it yet. I don't know if I'll give you a chance, but if you're good enough, if you're that good, I may give you a chance. I mean, you make it a joke out of it, but the disability, I think the major difference I find myself when I'm in a wheelchair and when I was perfectly walking and where you can't see the disability, I can't hide it. I can't say, maybe I'll tell them on my fourth date with them right away. When as soon as they heard that I'm a quadriplegic, automatically they think of Christopher Reeves. For those of you who are old enough who knows who Christopher Reeve is, Superman. But for those of you who are very young, he is someone in the past, in the distance, but there hasn't been that many people in a wheelchair that has been in the media and is famous enough for all the young people who actually know who they are. But automatically they think of a power wheelchair. I can't move most of my body except for my head maybe, and then I can't touch or feel anything. And that is the perception I get and the awkward questions. And with Eden, I get asked all sorts of real questions. For little kids, when I go skiing, I'm downhill skiing with them all morning, and this little kid come up to me and said, "Why are you in a wheelchair? Is it because you're lazy?" I mean, the thing is that I love questions like these from kids because adults stop asking those questions when they want to find the answers. They guess. And what I'm trying to tell you, for those of you with a visible disability, is that, or invisible disability, is that it's okay to disclose if you feel you're confident enough, confident about yourself, about your disability, and how to overcome these disabilities in a relationship. Definitely disclose, because then from day one, you two can be working together towards finding a common goal, common way of dealing with situation when it arises. And for me, with my husband, you know, I think the third time I met him, I had some health issues right away. He didn't say a second word. It's just, what can I do? And I tell him all the procedures, and instantly he did it as if he's been doing it for years. Not a second question asked, because we had that understanding day one. He still gets surprised, but he's not shocked by it and didn't know what to do. And I think that's the major difference between when people can't see and when people can see right away.
So I'm actually gonna ask. So Seth, I have a question that I'm gonna ask you, and I'm gonna blend it with the next question that I want to ask, because I also wonder if, based on what Mighty Quinn said, if there's a difference between male and female. I had a hilarious interaction with a friend of mine who also has cerebral palsy, and he was just like, he's straight, and he was telling me that nobody cares, and that men are just as empathetic as women when it comes to disability. And I said, absolutely not. And I will prove it to you. Like, we were in a taxi and I said, stop the car. And we got out and I grabbed a napkin and a pen and we went into a random bar, and I went table to table and just very quickly was like, excuse me, my friend and I have a bet. Would you be dating your partner if they were actually disabled? Like, on the spot. I just asked them right there at the table. And we did it for about an hour, and not a single man. Like, it was really funny because most of the guys were like, how disabled? And they like they wanted to know like on some kind of qualifier, like on a level or a spectrum. So all the women were like, oh, of course, yes, like we don't care about that, of course not. So I'm just wondering, I remember as a teenager, my father told me that because I'm a wheelchair user, that people are going to automatically assume that half of you is broken, that the half of you don't work. And the reality is, you're right, people Google and they see all kinds of symptoms, and then they start making connections that aren't correct. So I'm wondering, to you, like, do you see there being a difference? Like, do you think that there's going to be a difference when you do start developing symptoms of Huntington's? And then also, like, how do you protect yourself from the ableism and the discrimination that is coming? From other people that are going to either talk about you or, other symptoms that, in case you want to date later in life, that's not necessarily going to be the end all be all.
Well, first, I need to go to that bar that you said that you found all those girls for me. I mean, that's the first thing I need. So let me know. But yeah, I think the other thing, and this is something I observed, is like, if you're with someone and then they get diagnosed with a health condition, I feel like they're like, all right, I'm already with them, I'm committed. Versus like in my case, they're like, oh, I'm gonna Google it, see the videos, like, oh, I have an option to opt out before I opt into this committed relationship. And so for me, that is a big challenge. And I mean, I just learned to be myself and kind of show that vulnerable side. I've learned that, this is actually Men's Health Month. And so I am trying to show like, hey, guys can show emotions without feeling that sign of weakness. It's tough. As I'm sure you can see, there, aren't as many guys in the health space who are willing to share their story. And I'm hoping to try to change that. But it is tough because with my mom, when she did start showing symptoms, the physical symptoms that you could see, there were these like drunk-like movements, like slurred speech, wobbly movements. So we had people who thought she was drinking. And I think that's my fear, is people are going to view me for that, saying, oh, what are you, drunk? Right? Or why are you acting weird? Even times, I deal with brain fog and anxiety, and like from time to time, if I forget something, it's tough for me because my friend's like, oh, how do you not remember that? I remember actually someone I was, went on a few dates with, was like, I told you that. How did you forget? And I'm like, I just did. Like, I don't know. Right. And what I loved what Mighty Quinn said was like, simply just, I'd rather them ask questions versus kind of like saying, oh, you're X, Y, and Z, right? For me, oh, you forgot that. Oh, you don't remember things. You're not listening to me. It's like, no, I am. It's just sometimes I forget these things, and that's just who I am. So I think that's important, is trying to be open and transparent. Having that open communication is huge. I do, in all honesty, put a lot of pressure on myself because I see my friends who are in serious relationships or married or having kids, and that's something I want. And they try to say, "Oh, you'll get it. Like, don't worry." But I'm racing against, I feel like, two clocks, right? The one is racing against the clock with Huntington's disease, and then like the societal clock of like, you're supposed to get married by this age and have kids by this age. And I'm like, I'm 30 and I'm supposed to have all this done by now. And so I'm trying to remind myself to kind of take a step back and say, okay, I don't have to be on the societal timeline. I don't have to even be on the Huntington's disease timeline, because at the end of the day, if I rush into the wrong thing, I'm not going to be happy. And I think that's what I'm trying to, slowly do, is just find that happiness within myself before I find it within others. And then at the end of the day, just try to find someone that will see me for who I am holistically.
Seth, there's no clock. I didn't have my baby until I was 38 years old, and I got married like around that age too. I mean, there's no rush. You just have to find yourself the right one. There's no time limit. I know you're racing a clock against the manifesting of the Huntington disease as well. But even though you're a carrier, isn't there a 50-50 chance, or is it for sure your offspring will have the Huntington carry the gene as well?
Yeah. So yeah, each child of a parent has a 50-50 chance of inheriting it. But also for me, coming from a guy, it can progress a lot faster if it gets passed down and they have it. And so for me, I saw my mom go through it for 17 years, and it was tough because I couldn't do anything about it. And you see your loved one go through it and you're like, wow, like, what do I do now? And so, I told myself I wouldn't want to potentially put a kid at risk looking at the other family planning options. I think and I know we'll get into that probably in a bit, but I think what's challenging again is that I want to try to build memories before I potentially get sick. And it's just more of, because it sucks for me when my mom passed. Like, I try to remember her when she was like, healthy. And I can't. I see her when she was sick, and it breaks my heart, because I don't want that for my family to see, me, if I get sick or from a nursing home and things like that. I want to be able to have that lifestyle, but I also, at the end of the day, just need to do what's in my control. And sometimes it's just, being patient and waiting for the right thing at the right time.
So I actually wanted to bring this up. Someone had asked a question, which is related to this, what y'all are talking about right now. And they're basically asking that if you have disabilities with genetic components, the question is, has that come up in considering having children versus adopting? Like I was gonna say, based off what Mighty Quinn just said, so genetics are 50-50. I am a carrier of, I don't have sickle cell, but I was told I am a carrier of it, which means that the reality is I don't have that disease. But if I were to end up with somebody who was also a carrier and we somehow decided to go through a surrogate, if we both are carriers, then it's a very, very good chance that our child will have sickle cell disease. So, I mean, obviously, y'all are talking about this right now, and I'm just wondering, the person asks that, they're just worried about having a child that struggles with depression, or, like having to support that child in a world that really is not built to support people with mental health disorders. And so, the question really is, how does that factor into whether you decide to have children at all, or, are you just going like straight adoption to avoid it?
So it's actually interesting you bring this up, because for me, I always thought it was you either have to adopt or have a kid naturally. But then I went to go see a genetic counselor and spoke with them about what are my family planning options. I learned about IVF, in vitro fertilization, with pre-implementation genetic testing. That is a mouthful, but it's IVF with PGT. as well as like, sperm donation, right? Or an egg donor. And I think it's just important to learn what your options are and have these conversations with your significant other. And I also, I would recommend perhaps speaking with a genetic counselor who may be knowledgeable about this. These are just options I'm thinking of. And then it's, trying to figure out what's going to be best, not just for me, but, my future partner as well.
Can I just pipe in this idea for a second? Is that I think, having the genetic predecessor in your genes makes you or your child 50% more likely to swing your way. And in this case, I'd hear you two saying, yeah, I have this, and there's a good possibility that my child will have it. But I think if you look at the glass half full, there is a good chance, 50% at least, that your child won't have it. And that makes it possible to pre-plan, right? So if you're selling yourself or think to yourself that way and sell your potential gene or defective gene as a 50% chance of having a regular child, that makes you feel a little better. In my, like, if I were in your situation, I would think there's a 50-50 chance, and I have 50% a chance to prepare myself for the possibility of having a child like me. There's also a 50% chance my child could not. And Seth, for you to pre-plan and finding what other options there are, kudos.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that is obviously like extremely important. And, obviously it really just comes down to, personal preference. I have a friend who has two autistic children, and they're both nonverbal. And he and his wife are carriers, and they were okay with it until she had a third child, and then they weren't. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back, mainly just because it was so stressful for their, already trying to figure out what the planning was going to be for multiple rounds. And then on top of that, they got divorced because he's gay, and it was a mess all the way around. And so, but he is a wonderful father. His ex-wife is a wonderful mother, and they do raise their children with the utmost care, but they're both really, really fierce advocates in the autism community for that reason, and it runs through their entire family. So I know that was a conversation that they've had many times. I would love to ask, so Eden, I mentioned this before. One of my favorite shows on TV right now is The Good Doctor, and it won multiple disability awards last year for the storyline where there's a main character with autism on the show who is trying to have sex as a grown man with some people in the office. And like I said, I'd never in my life ever seen anything like that on TV. And it was wonderful the way that they were talking about the difficulties, because, this is somebody who couldn't even hold a person's hand for more than 10 seconds. So it's like, how on earth are you possibly going to have sex with somebody who can't even be held or touched? And I know that the autism spectrum is wide and varied, but I would love to know, like, for example, like, what does intimacy look like in your relationship? And, other people here can feel free to answer this as well.
Yeah, so for me, I think it mostly comes down to knowing what to expect. Because I've never really had difficulties with physical touch in general. So that's like not a problem for me. And a lot of autistic people, especially if they're like really sensory seeking, will actually like highly seek out physical touch from other people. So that isn't a problem. Like kissing, sex, whatever, not a problem. But in terms of just like knowing what's going to happen, I needed my girlfriend to like walk me through step by step, like explain every point along the way, for like the first couple times. And then I was like, okay, and then I don't need that anymore. But I feel like for a lot of people, the explaining step by step might have been kind of an awkward experience, but she is also probably autistic. She's going to get evaluated this summer. And so I think she just kind of intuitively understood, like, this is just communication. It's necessary. There's nothing awkward or weird about it. And it definitely made me a lot more relaxed. And it was very comforting in a way, because it was like, okay, she really cares about me.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that is, I mean, that's the goal, ain't it? Like that's the end all be all that I think everybody really wants. I know from my own personal experience, it wasn't until I left the United States and was living in Germany that I was even able to have any of those kind of experiences. And the bottom line is like finding someone. I I ended up at something called a pulse party, which is basically just a party in a basement with all the lights turned off, connected to music, and everybody was naked. And I had these German dudes like lift me up and take me into like a war bunker in the basement. And yeah, it was really complicated, but we made it work. And I was going on dates and it was great. And so I do think that your point, Eden, about making sure that people know what's coming and what to expect is obviously the most important part. I think communication is key. So with that said, I wanted to also remind people in the audience, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We're gonna save a few minutes and answer any of the questions that we see. But I wanted to round this out and ask, obviously we're all grown, we're all adults. Hallelujah, thank you, Jesus, because I do not want to go back to being young again. But if you could look back at your teenage years and the growth that you've experienced now as an adult, are there things in your adult lives, whether that be your parents, the caregivers, or medical providers, are there things that they could have done to better support you as you were moving through this phase, like dating, romance, and any other part of your identity? And I'll start with Mighty Quinn.
Well, thank you. That is actually a great question. I mean, for me, I think everyone including myself, could have done something different. First of all, we're continuing to discover our disability, how to overcome it, and our bodies at that, or our mind, or however. And that discovery needs to be supported by family members and especially healthcare providers. I remember that I was not able to go to, and even to most of today, a lot of things I can't go to my parents with, because they will do what they think is right, which is, no, you don't need that, or no, it's too dangerous. No, you don't know what will happen, so therefore you should just stay in your little hole or little bubble, and you're safe that way. I used to work with a spinal cord injury community, and I call it the umbilical cord syndrome. Is that no matter how old you are, you will always have that umbilical cord tied to your parents, and they won't let you go. They won't let you adventure into somewhere where they think is dangerous, and they will definitely not let you try anything that they don't understand or know what it is. Like when I went skydiving, I never told them about skydiving. I told them after I came back, I'm still alive. And something like that, we learned as an adult that we did our pre-planning. We know how dangerous it is. We have taken every precaution to be safe, and therefore perhaps parents don't need to know until I've done it. And after that, a few more adventures I didn't dare to tell them until they are comfortable enough. After I came back, showed them the videos, showed them the pictures, how cool it was. And eventually when I went to wheel on the Great Wall of China, they're like, we're going to come with you, and we're going to bring the rest of our family to come and see you do it as well. And that's how you build their tolerance, like how we do with children, and we reverse that role with parents. Yeah, and something with healthcare professionals is that if you know your body very well, you did your research, make sure you stay with what you know is true. And your healthcare professionals may not always know what the best solution to your current issue is. For example, I was perfectly, had no asthma whatsoever. After about 5 years having my spinal cord injury, suddenly I had trouble breathing. I went to my doctor. My doctor said, you have asthma. I went on 4 different puffers and nothing was working. And I was like, no, there's something wrong. Something's wrong with me. So I forced him to make me to go to a lot of specialists. And 1 year, 3 weeks, 6 days, no, about 7 days after I made my first inquiry, I finally went and saw a specialist, and it turned out to be there was a tear in my throat, which closed off. So I wasn't having asthma. The point is that if you know your body and you learn your body and you know your body so well, do not let someone just push you under the rug or make a misdiagnosis if you think it is. Stay true to yourself and continue on. Again, the third thing that's so important, because my age is up there now, is that really find your support group. Find the people who will support you, whether it's your friend, your counselor, your friend over the internet, or people in this group simply talking. Find who your advocates are, find who your support group is, and stay with them, because you will find your strength within that group. So I think I talked a lot already.
I say, child, look, I'm in the group with your parents skydiving. What? The only time people should be jumping out of a plane is if it's on fire. So, I'm with your parents in that category. Good Lord.
That's why I would tell you afterwards.
Seth, do you want to add something?
Yeah, Mighty Quinn, I've gone bungee jumping, never again. So like, I hear you. Well, I don't hear you. I don't know what you were thinking. I wasn't thinking, but yeah, I just wanted to kind of echo what you said, especially towards the end of like finding your support group. I think, for me, that was kind of one of the reasons why our Odyssey was started for young adults, not feel alone and feel isolated and get that sense of belonging and connect with each other, but also to share stories, to know how to self-advocate, like when you're at the doctor's office, and making sure that the doctors do listen to the patients and work in a collaborative effort. I remember one doctor was trying to explain Huntington's disease to me when I just already knew about it. And rather than explaining it, they could have said, oh, I'm interested in learning more about it. Can you share a little bit more? And so what I learned is like, find the specialist that works kind of best for you, or find the doctor that works best for you. And it might take a few turns, but it's definitely important to find that. And then regarding kind of, I guess, friends and family and looking back, I remember, and it still happens today, like a lot of my friends and family, they're like, oh, I'm surprised you don't have a girlfriend or that you're not with someone. And I'm like, well, that doesn't help my situation. That just adds pressure to me to like have to find someone ASAP. And then I just try to bring myself back to reality and say, I got to manage those expectations and not feel pressured about what society tells me to do, but do what's best for me. And that's something I try to remind myself of each day. But also, my friends have been like lifelines to me of just helping me and giving me advice and most importantly, just listening to what they have to say and allowing me to process these things over time, versus sometimes I'll kind of go with my gut or jump to conclusions versus taking a step back and processing it and taking a moment just to see if this is the right decision or if this is the right fit for me. So those are a few things I would definitely recommend. But Mighty Quinn, I think, did a pretty good job at explaining some good places to look for support or for advice.
Definitely, and like I said, at 35, my parents keep being like, so we gonna get grandchildren or no? And I'm just like, which country would you like? Please point out the country you would like for adoption. And my mom doesn't like that answer, but it is what it is. Eden, do you want to add something to this?
Yeah. Just for like, in terms of communicating with doctors and health professionals and whatever, I've had to push both my parents and sometimes my doctors to get me referrals for conditions that I know I probably have and need to get tested for. That's how I got my ADHD diagnosis. It's how I've gotten my EDS diagnosis, like, because I did a lot of research, thanks autism, hyper focus on subjects of interest. So I knew like exactly what I was talking about and what was going on. And I just needed other people to listen to me and take me seriously, even though I was really young. Like I was like 15, 16 years old, and they were like, how do you know all this stuff? Like, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, actually I did. So, and then, you know, now I have those diagnoses. So like for parents, it's important to listen, and doctors too, listen to your patients if they have concerns. And then in terms of parents understanding the conditions themselves, I think it's important for people to seek out information from self-advocates and adults who have the conditions that their children have, because the best way to learn about any group is from the source and from people who actually experience it. And so I've had my parents read a decent amount of books by autistic people, etc., in order to actually understand me better. Because it's one thing to just hear me say something about myself and they're like, oh yeah, okay, and they don't know how seriously to take it. But if they hear a ton of other people saying the same thing that I'm saying, then it makes them take it a lot more seriously.
And I think that is an excellent point, because the reality is, as Mighty Quinn said, the umbilical cord syndrome blocks out what people hear, and so they're not gonna listen when you try to explain it to them. As we're coming to time, I would love to end this on a note of joy. So I was just thinking about the time that it was probably the question that I have is like, what is the best date that you've ever been on? And I would just point out that, like, for me, I was on a date and he took me to the semifinal match. I was living in Germany and the World Cup was actually going on, and it was being hosted in Germany, which is literally like once in a generation kind of thing. So he took me to the semifinals match outside of the stadium. There was 500,000 people. I couldn't see anything because everybody was taller than me. I'm in a wheelchair. So he told me to get up on his shoulders. And here I am, 19 years old, sitting on this grown man's shoulders, looking at 500,000 people, and then Germany won. And there was fireworks, and we started making out, and it was very Disney. Greatest moment ever. So I would love to end this just asking, like, what is the best date or experience that you've had? I'll start. Let's start with Eden.
So this is reminding me of like one of the first dates I had with my girlfriend. I had to go to an abandoned quarry for a school assignment, and it's like it's gotten turned into a park. So, and it's not like a super deep quarry or anything. It's just kind of in a random place behind some houses in Burlington. So I was like, hey, do you want to come to this abandoned quarry with me over the weekend for my school assignment? She was like, yeah, absolutely. So and I had my crutches with me, and we were supposed to be taking the bus because I usually will experience pain if I'm walking for too long. And we were like trying to catch the bus. It wasn't stopping at the stops. It like passed us a few times, and we were like, what do we do? Well, we have to go to the quarry. So we walked, and then on our walk, we met like a random dog on the sidewalk. There was some free stuff just sitting out on somebody's lawn, and there were some really cool like antique pottery things, and we picked up a couple of those. And we went to the quarry, and there was just beautiful succulents everywhere, all over the place. Just really beautiful scenery. The rock was really red. And then there were two like little boys who maybe were in elementary school or something, who I guess saw us through some trees and looked at us. And one of them said to the other one, they look like they're on a date. And we were. But I just thought that was really funny and cute. And then we ended up going onto the top of a rock and looking out over the tops of the trees. And it was just really a really nice moment for us.
That sounds like an actual Disney painting.
Yes.
I know. I was like,
Seth.
I'm gonna go next because I'm the single one here. So like, Mighty Quinn probably has something better than me. So I'm just gonna go. So I would say, I mean, yes, I've been on a fair share of dates. I think the one that stood out to me was kind of like a weekend, which was just I'm big into sports. So going to a sporting event with them and really just spending the day with them, getting to know them, trying to really connect on a deeper level. Going to the Red Sox game, I'm from the Boston area. It was, an amazing game. It was a fun time. But then later that weekend, brought them to a wedding and we went to a wedding together. And it was really just, I think, that special time, that special moment to really connect with someone on a deeper level and to, when you see two people who come together and find that true love, right? It's something that I want one day. And so I think for me, it was that kind of reminder. Of course, didn't work out with a girl, but I still had a great time at the wedding. It was a fun time. And I think just overall, what I love about meeting people is really trying to dive deeper into these conversations with them about life, about what my values are and my, interests in, building community and building trust and love with people around me. So that's what I got.
I would just say bringing a date to a wedding is ballsy. God.
I got at a +1. What can I say, right?
Okay, Mighty Quinn, round you out.
Well, I have so many dating stories, but sorry, my favorite one is actually the first time I went on a solo date with my husband now. Is that, as you know, in Asia, it's not very wheelchair friendly at all. And when I landed in Shanghai airport, my husband met up with me and he said, we are going to go wherever the first train will take us. I was like, oh my God, no planning, no call ahead and see if they're wheelchair accessible, no asking if there's a ramp. He's like, everywhere we go, it will be accessible because I'm with you. And that's when you find the right person to be with. And I think that's like the simplest story, yet it's probably the one I will remember for the rest of my life. And just so for a bad story to end off is that there are a lot of bad stories. You have to weed out the bad ones to get the best one.
I was gonna say, oh my God, like Mighty Quinn, like that is like the best. It's the best. Thank you so much. Thank you. I have loved having this conversation with you all. This was wonderful. And to round it out and end us off, I will turn this back over to Katie.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We truly appreciate both our panelists, Seth, Eden, and Mighty Quinn, and our moderator, DRC. And on behalf of CNF and our communities, we're so grateful the time that you've shared with us tonight. As a reminder, CNF and our partners have more resources and transitions of care available both on our website and also in the password protected hub that you've accessed to get all of our talks for this event. They're also dropped in the chat box and they've been shared via email with you like 2 or 3 times a day. So definitely check those out. Also, soon you'll be receiving an email thanking you for attending this talk. Please fill out the survey that's in it. We really appreciate your feedback and we do need it to better understand how we can serve up the content that's of interest to you. So with that, we'd like to thank our partners, Acadia, Biogen, Eisai, Genentech, Greenwich, and Zogenix for their support of this event. And we invite you, if you found this interesting and enjoyable, we'd love to receive a gift or a donation to CNF. There's a link in the chat and it will also be provided via the emails that we're sending. There's plenty more summit to attend. Please join us tomorrow, Wednesday, June 21st at 7 p.m. for our upcoming talk. Oh, sorry, June 23rd, getting my dates right, at 7 p.m. for our upcoming talk long distance caregiving for young adults with disabilities, future planning for siblings from afar. So thank you so much to our speakers and to everyone for joining us tonight. We hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.